Good morning. It's the third Sunday of Easter, and like the last few weeks, I've been recording my talk for the Sunday services. And so those who aren't able to see it on Facebook can share these things as well. Today we're thinking about the story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. And so I'm going to read the passage from St. Luke's Gospel now as we begin this part. That same day, two of them were going to the village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking to each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked among them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What were you discussing when you walked along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. What is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early in the morning, but didn't find the body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued as if he were going further, but they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening, the day is almost over." So he went in and stayed with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. One of the pleasures of the last few weeks, one of the small advantages of lockdown is that we've had more baked bread at our house. I'm a bit of a baked bread fan. I like homemade bread, and it's been one of the real joys and real pleasures that we have a bread maker, and Alison's very good at putting things in their bread maker. She's also good at making other sorts of bread as well. And so we've had the delight of having some homemade bread in our house, and the smell is wonderful. But one of the nice things of that is also to be able to make bread for other people. And Alison, in her generosity, has offered bread to others, our next door neighbour and one or two other people. And it's been really nice to be able to share that gift of bread and to take that out to other people. I was reminded this week of a church in Liverpool called the Bread Church, and this was started the origins of the church started 17 years ago when the Methodist Church in Liverpool decided they wanted a Methodist presence in the city centre, and there was no chapels open at that time, and so they began praying for the Methodist community in that city centre. A minister called Barbara Gleeson started walking the parishes and walking the streets of Liverpool. And out of it, after a long process of prayer and discussion and meeting the community, a project around bread began. And Barbara started this project, which was about making bread. And today, 17 years later, the Bread Church is a church that meets regularly, well, outside of lockdown, of course, but meets twice a week on a Tuesday and a Thursday to make bread. And people come, and often it is people who are marginalised, people who are on the outskirts on the edges of the community, those who are poor, those who are in need, those who are feeling vulnerable. And it's a wonderful example where people turn up and they make bread. They make 2 loaves of bread together. In that process, they talk and share in things. While the bread is baking, they share in worship, and then they have a meal together, a very simple meal where they share some of the bread. When people go, they are invited to take both loaves. They make 2 loaves, one for themselves and then another to give away. And it's a really nice project, and it's a really lovely idea, because surely at the heart of this community is that image of the community being a place where people can dwell. All are welcome, but at the same time, a reminder that when we receive love, we're also invited to give love. And love isn't something we keep for ourselves, but it's something that we share. I love that image of the whole bread and the breaking of bread and the sharing, a reminder of what the church is always meant to be. When we hear the story of the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, we see 2 men who have lost their hope. They're walking away from Jerusalem. It's a very symbolic act. They're walking away from their hopes and their aspirations. They had a great hopes in this man, Jesus, who they say was a prophet, a holy man. They thought he was going to redeem Israel. But as they walk away, they've walked away from their community, but also their faith and their sense of hope for the future. Jesus walks alongside them, and instead of, he doesn't deny what happened. Jesus has died on that cross. But instead of saying this was some sort of accident or some sort of unfortunate end to his life, he reminds them that the cross was meant to be. It was a journey that he had to take. It was about offering of love. And for Jesus, the giving of the cross, the dying on the cross, he explains, was the way he revealed God's glory and revealed God's compassion for the world. When Jesus breaks bread with those disciples at that meal, he reminds them that this love that God has poured out into the world isn't something that is to be kept, but is to be shared. He reminds the disciples that they are called not just to receive love, but to give love. Just think of the parallel of the Last Supper, when Jesus says to the disciples at the Last Supper, "This is my commandment, that you must love one another as I have loved you." Nothing changes for the disciples in that the circumstance of what's happened hasn't changed. But what Jesus does to those disciples is to change them in themselves. They discover new hope. Instead of trusting in one human being, they trust in the gift of love. They are given a new hope that this world in which they live in may still be the same. They still may be under Roman occupation, but they have a new hope that the way of love will bring change and transformation. What do you hope for? What are your hopes and your dreams? It's an interesting question, isn't it? What do we have in our heart? What do we long for? Maybe we long for a world where poverty is ended, where we long for a world where there is no illness or viruses. We maybe pray for a world where injustice and war will end. Our experience of human history is these things will always be with us. Jesus says you will always have the poor with you. But to trust in Jesus and to trust in his ways gives us hope for a future, not for a perfect world. Jesus still died, and there is still death, there is still poverty, there is still hunger in our world. But what we can discover is a new way of living. The way of Christ is the way of love, of compassion. When we come together, we can discover God's love for each one of us and how each one of us is of great value. But we're also reminded that love is something that we share and offer to others. And in doing so, we bring light to our world. My prayer for the church is that we learn to be places where God's love can dwell. Places where communities where people are welcomed and encouraged and nurtured. But we're also encouraged to be places where people are encouraged to offer themselves, to give of themselves, to share their lives, to enable others to experience God's love as well. Maybe when we experience this sort of church, then Christ will be truly visible. His risen life will be truly visible in us. And so may God bless us in that. May God encourage us and nurture us in his ways. Alleluia. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia.